Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is an episode in which I was interviewed over on Chad Burmeister's podcast called the AI for Sales podcast, the AI for Sales podcast. So Chad has been running this podcast now for a couple of years, and he's nearly 200 episodes when it comes to the topic of how to think about and how to apply artificial intelligence in the sales world. So obviously it's a big topic for a lot of people trying to figure out what tools should be used, what automation should be used, how to write emails using artificial intelligence. How do you do account research? How do you think about the role of artificial intelligence in the sales stack or in the tech stack when it comes to being a more effective salesperson? So I've been following Chad for many years. He and I have connected on LinkedIn years and years ago. We every so often flicked each other a note or DM or comment on each other's post. And I had been listening to his podcast. I subscribed to it about a year ago and have been sending him a couple notes here and there. I'm like, hey, I love this podcast, or I like this perspective. And so he turned around and asked me to join him on his show to get my perspective on sales for AI, or AI for sales. So that's what this episode is all about. I thought it'd be a good bridge episode between the recent Go Farther series that we just wrapped up in the first half of this year and ahead of the fall season coming up very, very soon. So got a couple episodes like this coming up to fill the feed, to make sure you've got some new content coming your way, keep you excited, keeping you listening to the Startup Selling Show here. I'm excited to keep bringing you these podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. If you are first coming across this episode or this show by way of LinkedIn or referral or something else, please do follow the show. We've got loads of episodes. I've been running this podcast for nearly 10 years now. So we have hundreds and hundreds of episodes in the archives. Many of them are around sales strategies, sales systems. We've had many, many guests on the podcast, as well as different series that we've run, including that recent Go Farther podcast series. So definitely check out the episode. Tell a friend or 10, leave us a review, do all those things to help us get the word out about the podcast, because the best way to spread the word is by word of mouth, meaning your mouth. So thank you very much for listening over the years. If this is your first episode or just the first couple of episodes, welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Chad Burmeister and me. I certainly enjoyed it. I think he's been very thoughtful and one of those real professionals when it comes to applying a thought process around artificial intelligence for the sales world. All right. Thanks so much for listening. Talk soon.
Welcome back to another AI for Sales podcast. I'm Chad Burmeister, your host. And if you notice, if you're on the video today, I'm wearing the same shirt from before. That's because it's still the same day here when I'm talking to Scott. But really glad to have you on the show, Scott. This is Scott Sambucci. Sales Qualia is the company name. He's a startup coach, a keynote speaker, podcaster, and best-selling author. Spent 25 years building and selling enterprise technology products as an executive at 2 publicly traded companies and leading 3 Silicon Valley startups, each to their first millions in revenue. Applia, acquired by Cengage, and Altos Research, acquired by HW Media, and Blend Labs, IPO in 2021 under the symbol BLND. So we're talking with a veteran, and man, so much is going on with AI that I just can't wait to dig in and learn more about what you're seeing out there. So thanks for being here, Scott.
Yeah, no worries, man. I'm really glad to be here. And by the way, is it okay if I'm wearing the same shirt as yesterday? Today.
Well, I don't know. Mine at least has a layer underneath, so I think you're okay. We've got 30 inches of snow here in the last couple of days, so I'm sure I'll be wearing some of the same ski outfits over the coming days. Well, so Scott, I'd love to help our audience get to know who you are. I'd like to help kind of connect the dots by asking, what was your passion? What was your thing when you were younger? Kind of where'd you grow up first?
Yes, I appreciate this question. So I grew up in New Jersey, South Jersey. If you're from New Jersey, there's South Jersey and North Jersey. So South Jersey is very different. Farmland for the most part, going back, I'm 49, it'll be 50 this year. So 50 years ago, it was basically all suburbs of Philadelphia. And so my parents are pretty middle America. My dad was an accountant, my mom's a teacher, and grew up in a great family, great parents, 2 sisters, one older, one younger. It's kind of like every single advantage that could be given to somebody when they're born. Being a male, being white, being middle class in the United States with a solid, great family home life. So really fortunate to have all of those advantages.
Yes. Well, so it's interesting. I see AI helping to, speaking of advantages, giving people advantages, right? No matter where you come from or what your background is,
Yeah.
I think access to AI is becoming prevalent thing. So thinking about, from then to now, over the last 50 years, you've seen a lot. What are you seeing over the last 12 to 24 months around the big push of AI? Like what's going on out there?
Yeah. So, so a lot of different ways I thought about this question. So let me go back to Sales Qualia and when I first started the concept of this company. So we're a sales coaching company. We work with growth stage, B2B tech startups selling to the enterprise. So typically our customers, our clients are startups that are around seed stage, Series A, a lot of founder-led selling, maybe a small team around that person, but certainly looking to grow to get some repeatability and scalability in their sales process. So it's a service-based business for the most part. But when I first started this company back in the first concepts of it in 2011, while it was around coaching and training, because I was a head of sales at these different companies, one of the things that I first thought about was this idea of like, how do I scale sales management? How do I scale training? Because even at my own startups, even a small handful of sales reps, you realize like, man, there's a lot of work to do. I got to listen to this call. I got to talk to this person. I'm on this call with Jeff. And then, man, I wish that Alan was on this call, listening on this call with Jeff, because the things that he's hearing should be the things that Alan's hearing. And it was just like kind of befuddling and like, how do you actually scale management? So I went to a startup weekend that was hosted way back in early 2012. And the concept I had was that even back then, right, you could go get transcriptions by going out to Mechanical Turk or other places like Upwork. It used to be called something else before it was Upwork. And so I had this idea, well, if I had a couple of sales calls transcribed and I wrote some code that could read and interpret that text, then that interpreter should be able to tell me, was this a good sales call or a bad sales call? And this is, again, 2012. So a lot of now you think about this and it's like a very basic concept. This is what Gong does and a lot of other platforms do. So I'd always kind of had this idea that there should be a better way to use technology as a way to do sales coaching, sales training, sales management because of the one-to-many environment that you're in as a sales manager or a leader of a company. And so that kind of was like my first thoughts. It wasn't AI, but it was this concept of it, going out and writing some Python code that was able to read the script of a couple of different sales calls I had recorded, had transcribed overnight with Mechanical Turk. And turns out that the guy I joined up with at the startup weekend, he and I ended up coming in second place for this concept. It turns out the Python code worked. So we had one call that I knew was a bad call and one call I knew was a good call. And we wrote the code and we were able to identify some really basic stuff, like how many questions were asked, what was the talk time, or how many words were spoken, like super basic code, but the concept of it worked. So I was like, God, like that seems to make sense. Now I don't have the technical chops. I'm a history major. I'm a finance MBA, econ major. So I don't have technical chops. And the guy that I worked with that weekend was sort of technical, but not super technical. And I also had a full-time job. So I never really pursued the tech side of the business. But what I was really good at is coaching and training. And that just kind of emerged through doing workshops and then picking up clients. And then one thing led to another. Ended up leaving my full-time work as a sales leader and then running Sales Qualia full-time about 8 to 10 years ago. So I share all that because it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, but only now over the past year do you see this acceleration in AI, even with the product improvements you've seen over the last few years with some of the call recording software and intent data and those sorts of things. So it kind of like really triggered, like for me, like, wow, we're living in a different world. And I pulled up this text message from earlier in 2023. So over the course of 8 to 10 years, I've coached lots of founders, lots of startups. And there's one founder that I coach that's based out on the West Coast. And he and I worked together off and on for about 3 years. And it'd been a little while since I'd seen him, but I was at this conference, this tech conference, and I was like, oh man, this would be perfect for him. I just had some ideas. You know how you sort of associate situations with people you've worked with. And I said, hey man, listen, and I sent him a text. I'm headed over to this event next week. And there's a couple people from XYZ company that I knew he used to be selling to. And I was like, it made me think of you. I was just wondering how have you been? And he said, good, thanks. Lots of up and downs, hunting elephants, feast or famine, tightening belts right now. H2 looks good. How about you? And I said, hey, things are really good. So good to hear back from you. So while I'm at this event, I'm thinking like maybe this is a good event for you to go to as well. And he responds back, and this is the kicker to me. Now, you've heard the context of this conversation that I'm describing to you, all happening on text. Yeah. He said, I've been to that event before. I looked at it. It wasn't the greatest experience. Probably a hard pass for me going forward just because we're cutting back on expenses. Also, are you using an auto service for these SMS messages? Vibe does not match you, FYI. Now, this is a guy I literally worked with off and on for 3 years. Like, I knew this guy so well that I remember one day we had a call and he said, listen, I got to get going because it's my son's birthday party. And I promised him we were going to do a water gun fight out in the backyard. Like, that's how well I kind of know this guy. And after that series of text messages, his cynical nature, this is in June of this past year, he's like, is this an auto service? It doesn't sound like you.
Wow.
That is the world that we're living in as salespeople right now.
Wow. And it obviously you did write the text.
Of course I did.
Of course I did.
Like, how could you train a bot to do that? Right? When I'm going to have him have a bot scour through like every coaching call, every email.
And then I had one yesterday. I had one yesterday. I just was sitting on the couch and I said, hey, haven't talked to you in a while. Happy New Year. And he came back. Chad, is this the Chad bot?
Is this you? Is this you?
And I just say, ha ha, yes, it's me. Yeah. Ask me the password or something, Wow. But that is the world we're living in. A lot
Absolutely.
of automation.
Absolutely.
Do you know Dr. Howard Dover from UT Dallas?
I do not.
He runs the sales school there. It's one of the fastest growing in the country. You should be a speaker there sometime. Good guy to get to know. He wrote a book on this topic that's it's in my dresser, but I don't remember where it sits. It's somewhere around there. But it's really good about all of this. And he did a study about the growth of SDRs and BDRs. They would look at it every year at UT Dallas. And for 10 years, it was like, doubling every couple of years. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the tools that are out there for sales enablement and sales engagement and LinkedIn and Facebook and, you get a multiplication factor of the number of headcount running those tools, and the tools themselves do more volume.
Yeah.
So the amount of noise that's out there, I can see why both of us had a similar experience recently on what we talked about. So.
Well, this has been a long time coming because of other platforms like Outreach or SalesLoft or some of these other platforms that were built, roughly starting 10 years ago on this concept of like, we're going to gear up and run these sequences and be able to do, even though there's Apollo now as well. Let's do lead research. Let's pull in all this contact data. We'll load up these sequences. We'll start sending out those emails, if-thens. And in some ways, you're like, wait, this is awesome. Like, it's highly efficient. It's good. This is what we need, is to be more efficient, because you don't want a BDR, or if it's a large enterprise deal, you don't want your account reps that are doing the farming and the prospecting, like sitting around typing out 100 emails when there's some measure of automation that will help you get some lift that doesn't require that level of personalization. But like all sales tools over the years, whether it's direct mail, the telephone with telemarketing, eventually email, like salespeople have we do a really good job of sort of bastardizing the technology. The same way, you look at like the internet, like most of the internet is mostly like porn, or like all of the fake news stuff. Like, we found a way to use these algorithms in a negative way, or the TikTok algorithms, or just consumer behavior, right? It's like the weight loss, there's this big push for like health in the 70s and the 80s. We realized like, oh, we have to get healthier as a nation. And ever since then, it's been like all these weight loss hacks with diet pills and exercise equipment and the Thigh Master and all those things. It's just like, this is what we do as a human species, is we run to the path of like, well, how can I leverage this down to the consumer, in the consumer mindset, that's going to help me sell more stuff, when we all agree like direct mail is really annoying, telemarketing is really annoying, but we know the weight loss hacks don't work. We complain about social media, but yet we still read it. Like we can't get away from these things. We all say we hate these things, but yet they're still coming at us because there's a micro percentage of those efforts that do still work. And so it's the same from my perspective with AI, whether it's the concept I had 10 years ago or what Gong is doing now or what these other platforms are doing to use and leverage AI. There's going to be a whole bunch of actors in the market, meaning salespeople in our situation and teams and leaders and companies that are going to use this to the point where everyone's going to be like you and I, it's like, is this a bot? Oh my God, can I just please talk to a human? You get that when you call into your airline and the flight's late, you have to change your ticket. It's like push 1 for this, push 2 for that. No. All of those things, we say we hate those things, but there's some sliver of it that actually does work for a small amount, enough so that those initiatives are profitable enough that they keep going. But as a broad mass, as consumers, we hate it. And so it's my belief that there's still this massive swing to be human. And that's a concept we talk about all the time with founders and people in our coaching program. And I have to tell myself this a lot. Like when you're talking to a prospect, whether it's your initial outreach or you're negotiating a contract, like this is not like a robotic conversation, or it isn't robot led stuff. You got to be human. You got to talk human to people. And I think there's just a real appetite for that.
Yeah.
Right now.
Well, I went to a conference recently, Traffic and Conversion in Vegas,
Sure.
a marketing summit, right? And one of the speakers, I'll tell you who it is, because he did it. So Roland Frazier is one of the big marketing guys out there, right? So he did a podcast with the co-founder, and he goes, "Yeah, they were in Mexico together." He goes, "Hey, how'd you like that podcast we did last week?" And the founder goes, "What podcast?" He goes, "The one where you and I talked about topic X." And he was like, "I still don't know what you're talking about." He goes, "Well, go ahead, log into YouTube, check it out." And it was full bot to bot conversation. The AI wrote the script because he used prompts to have it. And to me, that starts to get to be gray area, because now you got two fake human beings having a conversation that's written by a bot.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, great lead magnet, probably some interesting content, but you really didn't have any human intellect behind it. And so I don't know. I think half of humans would probably look at that like, yeah, that's brilliant. Do more of it. And I happen to be in the camp that says, that's one where I may draw a line and say, I'm not going to have Chad Bot do my podcast for me with Scott.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah. At some point, it's almost like when you go to, I go to CNBC and get, sort of business data, business information, and they have all their articles that are CNBC, and some are free and some are gated. And then every once in a while, they throw in some paid content. And there's a little tag on it that says this is paid content. It's almost at some point we should, would it make sense for us to have some kind of standard? And this could just mean like some large player or set of players stepping up and saying, like, hey, we know there's differentiation. We know consumers want to know the difference between what's a bot to bot versus human stuff. So we're going to tag this appropriately, because there are some people they'll be like, hey, that's cool. Like, I'll listen to a bot conversation. It's a podcast. I'll listen to it while I'm on the dog walk. I'll probably learn something interesting. I don't care. Right? Anyway. It's fine. Yeah. And as long as you're being transparent, this is bot to bot, and I know what I'm getting out of this, versus, let's say I'm on a sales call and we have some technology where, Chad calls Scott and it's a cold call and we start talking, and we go ahead and book a meeting, and I get in a call with the AE that you booked the meeting for, but it's actually not you. It was a bot the whole time through. And I thought I was talking to a human. Like, to me, that feels subversive. Just like you should tell someone like, hey, just so calling you from a recorded line. You got to tell people that.
In the first 30
seconds, disclose it.
This is Chad Burmeister, the AI Chad.
Right.
The purpose of my call is that I'd like to get you in front of the real Chad, but I have a couple questions for you, right? Like,
exactly. Something like that seems to make logical sense, and I think consumers would actually accept that. And if that were the case, this is just strictly my opinion based on my personal preferences. I think if that were the case, it would actually increase the demand and usage, or the acceptance of some of these AI-driven tools, whether it's a cold caller or bot-to-bot podcast or something else, because I know what I'm getting. I'm like, okay, this is bot-to-bot, or this is an AI thing. And if it's something of interest, I'm like, cool, I'll follow the prompt. I'll do a 3-minute cold call with a bot. If it's something that actually is something I care about and it's a problem I need to solve, cool, whatever. If it's going to help me solve my problem, I'm in. but just disclose it. Don't make me feel like I was talking to a human and then have that situation where it's like, oh, actually, joke's on you. It was just a bot. It was just a bot. So yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned about conferences, and we've tested living and working in isolation. We've had this global experiment called COVID, where everyone can work from Zoom, everyone can work from home. We don't have to go meet. We don't have to talk to anybody if we don't want to, except for on Zoom. And even there was all these Zoom bots popping up to make it look like you were on a meeting, even though you weren't. There's a whole Shark Tank episode on somebody who created this Zoom bot. Yeah. So we had that chance as a human race, as a business class, to go make that the norm. And everyone thought, okay, that will be the norm. But then what happened? People realized, like, no, I don't want just that. I want to be able to go to the office. We saw travel, just for personal travel, boomed once COVID was over, and it's still booming. I mean, Thanksgiving this year, I think, was the biggest travel holiday to date ever. It keeps growing, right? You mentioned you're at a conference. I've been to a couple of conferences this year in the fintech world and insurtech world for clients. And, you go to Vegas and it's a 20,000 person conference and everybody is there, and you're looking around, they're like, nope, no COVID here. It's just, there's no mask, there's no nothing, nobody cares. You're just like, because people want that immersive experience. They want the human to human contact, right? Yeah. That's what people want. And I see it even in my coaching program. Like, we have thousands of hours of content in our client library. And there are times where we'll be communicating, me or one of my coaches, say, look, you're working on your demos. Awesome. Here's a couple of 10-minute modules. Go watch these videos. Check them out. It's going to give you the baseline, give it a crack at a draft, and then come to a coaching call and I'll work on that with you and see how you did. Now, how many people go do the online version?
Right. 2 and 10.
Yeah. But most of the time, what they'll say is, oh, I didn't have time, which, is just an excuse. But then they get on the coaching call and they're like, okay, but I really want to prep for this demo I have next week with General Electric.
Yes.
And they'll sit and they'll listen and they'll talk and they'll spend an hour with you together, human to human, but they could have spent that same hour human to computer learning the exact same thing, because there's nothing that me or any of our coaches are going to teach them. It's going to be different. You're not going to get like this super secret thing in person that you didn't get in the video. It's designed to be the library to help you be self-sufficient. Library's open. Yeah. Library's open 24/7. You don't have to wait until Thursday at 3:00 for the coaching call.
What are your thoughts about kind of a plug-in to a Zoom, for example? So there's a group called Balto Software, BALTO. They've been doing this plug-in for call centers mainly, right? 50-person sales teams. They really hadn't had a one-to-one, right? You can't buy it for $99 a month for one user. But I can envision a time, especially in enterprise selling, right? I've always been in the SMB game. I've played in the $1 million plus deals, but when you start adding politics and all of the other things involved in blue sheeting and all of those kinds of things that we used to do, I just get a feeling that if I had a sidecar that would help me prompt and keep me on the rails. Chad, you didn't get to this question yet.
Yep.
Do you think there's an app that needs to be developed for that?
Oh, I know there's an app, and some of these call recording platforms are doing this in real time. They're starting to, you can transcribe in real time, and then it kicks back and it reads the text and says, okay, here's a good discovery question you should ask, or ask about budget here. And that's, one of the things that we talked about in preparation with this, or is like, where do I see AI helping coaching and training? And those seem to be, to me, like the real applications. It's like in real time, I'm immersed in a call and I need to focus on Chad, the buyer, and listen to what Chad is telling me as I'm asking these discovery calls, asking about what their situation is. And sometimes even if I'm super prepared, I've got my questions, I got my script, I got everything in front of me, like I'm not going to get to all of it. So having a little like, oh, this would be a good time to ask about who else would be involved with evaluating your software. Let's get a look at the team. Those are the types of, at least in my opinion, I think would make the most sense, as opposed to trying to replace the salesperson. I think there's plenty of places where we don't need a salesperson to do the sale. And that's what product-led growth is all about. Like, how many products can you go to now go to Calendly.com. You're like, oh, I need a Calendly app, a Calendly calendar. It's $20 a month or $10 a month or whatever. I can go do that. I don't need a sales rep for that kind of product. But from an enterprise standpoint, I'm a psychology guy, organizational psychology, people, humans. When I think about the sales process, I'm always talking about be human. What's that person thinking about? What's the bureaucracy that they're dealing with? That's just sort of an angle I like to take when I think about breaking down the sales process. And organizations are just like people. They're just big versions of humans. Organizations, that's why there's a whole field called organizational behavior. Mm-hmm. Like companies can't technically behave, but yet they do, right? We've experimented with PLG with enterprise-like sales. Everyone talks about like, oh, you'll remember Yammer. Nobody today knows what Yammer is.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
But you remember when Yammer first came out, like their whole thing was like, oh, we're going to get all the users, all the salespeople using Yammer. And then after a bunch of salespeople use it, then we're going to go into the sales manager or the VP of sales or the CRO and say, hey, you have 50 people using Yammer. You should have an enterprise license, right? We did the same thing with Slack. That's the more recent example. It's like, oh, Slack doesn't have any salespeople or didn't have any salespeople. That's BS. Like Slack had lots of salespeople. Go to LinkedIn. There's lots of Slack salespeople. And when I say all that, because when you think about AI replacing salespeople, especially in the enterprise segment, the cost, not just monetary cost, but the career cost, the switching costs, the difference between different platforms is too big. That humans on the other side, the buyers, they need to be able to ask questions and understand nuance. If anything, they just want validation that am I thinking about this the right way? And they're asking the salespeople, and they're asking their peers, and they're asking competitors. Right? That's what we do. We need and crave that interaction, that validation. And without that, if we just try to replace salespeople with AI bots and think that that's going to help close a $300K deal with General Electric or US Bank or Wells Fargo, it's just not going to work, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I don't think it'll ever work.
I'm taking an NLP course, a masterclass for 18 months. I'm 4 months in, every Friday, 1 hour with a 30-year veteran. And what's come to my mind is, again, similar to a sidecar, how cool would it be? In early sales training 25 years ago, they try to teach you, hey, if you're talking to this person, do this. If you're talking to that kind of, and yet it's hard as a person to actually try to mold to be a different person than you actually are.
Yeah.
But imagine a sidecar that says this person's visual, this person's auditory, this person's kinesthetic. And if it could know those nuances from the live interaction and just pop up, hey, use your visual-based questions, right? Now you can start adding some of those nuances to make humans a better communicator than they would have otherwise been, powered by AI.
100%. Just like cell phones, mobile phones make salespeople more efficient. That's why everybody has a cell phone now, a mobile phone, a smartphone. Right. If the innovation is there, it's going to help you be better at your job, because now you can be doing calls as you're driving from one meeting to the next. Then you should have it. Right. Yeah. It makes you more efficient. Use that. But the phone can't make the phone calls for you. It can't talk to the people for you. It's just a tool that helps you do that thing that you want to do as a salesperson that much more quickly, or that much more efficiently, that much better.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I know we've got 30 minutes on these podcasts. I want to ask you one more question that's not listed, because I happen to go through your bio and it talks about in 2022, you were the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion by winning division title of International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation. What? Tell me more about that.
Okay, so I'll give you the medium length story. So last 15 years or so, I've been an endurance racer. I started off doing triathlons, Ironmans, and then I started doing ultra marathons. So those are races that anywhere from 50K, 50 miles, 100 miles, and I've done a couple of 200-mile running races. And then in 2021, I did a race called the Western States 100, which is considered to be one of the top races in all the world. It's totally crazy lottery system. It's hard to get into. It's sort of a once in a lifetime. And I trained like a madman for that race because I knew it was my one chance to do this race. I trained like a professional. I hired a coach. I was basically training 20 to 25 hours a week on top of running my business, on top of being a dad and a husband and all those things. And by the time I finished that race, I was just kind of like, I'm a little burned out from the endurance racing. And I was kind of looking for something else to do. And I had always thought about doing jujitsu as a martial art. I never did any martial arts. I never did any wrestling. I was younger. I got, like a lot of kids, you got bullied and you wish that you could have defended yourself a little bit better. So probably some of that in my seventh grade self in my psyche. And, in our town in Davis, there's a wonderful jujitsu academy that my son started going to when he was very small. He got interested in jujitsu by reading some kids' books by Jocko Willink. And so I took him to jujitsu for about a year and a half, and then COVID hit and he stopped going. And so I was like, I've always wanted to do jujitsu. I know Michael, who runs the academy, is awesome because I've seen him coach kids. And so in August 21, I started training Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So you start off as the white belt. And so by fast forward a year, I did my first tournament in March of 22, and then a second tournament in June of 22. And then in September of 22, I did what they're called the World Championships. Now, keep in mind, I'm at the time a white belt. So they class the tournament based on your age, your weight, and your level. So for me, it's white belts of a certain age and a certain weight. So it's not like I was like the world champion at black belt, but yeah, I trained my ass off and worked really hard and went to Vegas, and there was 9 other men in my bracket, and I beat them. And there I was, last man standing, hand raised, and got the gold medal. So it was pretty wild to experience that sense of like, wow, like winning in this sort of new art form in a way is a form. I mean, in some ways it is a way, as it is an art form as much as it is a martial art. And so I've continued to train, and now I'm a blue belt, I'm a color belt, and I'll be competing again in 2024. I'm going to go back to Worlds and see how I do as a blue belt. Probably not win, but I just always love competing, and it's more against myself than anybody else, which is why the ultra running is a good fit for me and my personality. And for me and the jiu-jitsu, it's just like, how do I get better every day? How do I improve? And it's something that it's like chess. You can never be like know everything. There's always something you can learn with jiu-jitsu. Michael's been training jiu-jitsu for 17 years. He's a black belt, and he's just like, God, my jiu-jitsu sucks, because he's always learning. Yeah. And it's just like it's like a whole different pursuit mentally and physically, and I've enjoyed it. And so it was cool. Yeah. So thanks for noticing.
Well, I mean, the fact that you compete in the 50 mile, the 100 mile, the 200 mile, each of those, I knew someone who did a 100 mile ultra marathon, I think is what that's called, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Anything over a marathon distance is considered ultra. Yeah.
So Antarctic Mike is a motivation speaker. Do you know Antarctic?
Okay. No, but I know there is a race down there.
He trained in the freezer, and the inspiration behind training in the freezer, like Rocky did, was that his wife, actually from Boulder, Colorado, where I live in Colorado, fell off of a cliff and broke like lots of bones. This was, I think, before they got married. And then they got married, and now she still has health concerns throughout her life because of that very large fall, 50, 80 feet, like a big, big fall.
Oh my gosh.
So he said his desire was to feel how she felt, right, by pushing himself to the extreme, training in a freezer and running in the Antarctica. So really neat guy. But and he helps people with sales training, motivational. Mm-hmm. So what I want to leave with our audience here is that learning from people like you that understand what it takes for preparation, training. I think where we're going as a society is putting a lot of that education inside of the AI. So that's my encouragement, is whether it's a mobile app or a plug-in to a Zoom, how do we take the leverage and the knowledge that people like you have and your coaches and build that in to make humans better humans than they would have been otherwise. So pretty exciting times, I think, for AI. There's a negative side because it can make people worse humans than they are too. But we've got to make sure to hold these AIs accountable and have someone watching over their shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point in that, whether you're selling to the enterprise and it's a 12-month sales cycle, we always give glory to like, okay, the contract signed, great job. But it was like how many countless meetings and hours of preparation and research that went into that, and bringing in team members to help you out with it, and figuring out ways to make it to that conference. You can meet with that one decision maker in real time. like all of that planning, all that preparation is what led to that signature. That's not when the sale happened. The sale happened when you finally landed that meeting in April with the one executive at the conference. And that's the meeting that led to the contract getting signed by the end of the year. And it's a lot like that with ultra marathons. People talk like, how do you run 100 miles in one go? And it's all about the prep and the training. For me, it was 6 months every day obsessing over it, planning, preparing, communicating with my wife, figuring out what made sense. What could I do? What couldn't I do? Leaving no stone unturned. So like, it's not just how many miles you can run, but it's strength training. It's looking at your diet, looking at nutrition, counting calories, looking at your sleep cycles, figuring out, okay, I got to travel and go on an airplane. So when I get to this place, where can I go get in 10 miles? Let me call the hotel and see what the gym is like. I mean, it's like every single facet of your life rotates around making sure that you can optimize for this. And it's exactly the analogy when it comes to training these AI bots. It's like, you can't just like, oh, I'm going to hire some AI bot to do sales for me. That's only going to be as good as what you train it to do. So until you're precise with exactly what you need and how to sell your product and who you sell it to, what the messaging is, what the objections are, how to answer it, and why they ask it in a certain way, you can't do any of that stuff effectively with AI until you've got it dialed in for yourself.
Yeah, right. It's just like BPO was a big hot thing 20 years ago, right? Hey, let's move some of this offshore. And It was a very similar situation. Hey, if I'm going to train somebody offshore to do the job, then I better have it very meticulously outlined. Same concept with AI. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. If someone's looking to upgrade their skills and sell to the enterprise, I know that's one of your specialty areas.
For sure.
They could visit Sales Qualia, SALES, just like it sounds, Qualia, QUALIA.com. And what's a good way to get in touch with you, Scott?
Best way, like you said, go to salesqualia.com. If you add a /book, you can download a copy, totally free, full version PDF of my most recent book called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Gives you the entire roadmap you need as a startup founder to start building out that repeatable sales process. So that's one great place to go. And then you can just find me on LinkedIn. Just Google me, search for me on LinkedIn, Scott Sambucci. I think I'm the only Scott Sambucci on LinkedIn. Easy to find, and easy to pick out which profile is mine. So best thing to do is just go to my profile and send me a note.
Just look for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion. Or just Scott Sambucci. Well, hey, it's been really great catching up with you again. Good to see you, Scott. Thanks for being here. And
thanks for having me on the show.
On the road at a conference one day again soon.
I'm sure. See you, Chad.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining another AI for Sales podcast.